As Mary Louise said, it's going to start with a presentation from Jason Thorne, who is the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development for the city. It's going to be on the downtown secondary plan, which is it's going to change the way planning decisions and development decisions are made throughout the downtown core. And Jason will get into more detail about what that means and how it works and what the implications are, followed by a Q&A, and then drinks by all means. Go to the bar and have a drink. And then after that, we'll open it up to the floor and we'll have a good, really productive discussion, I'm hoping. So I'm going to invite Jason to come up. Thank you.
This was preset for me, so thank you to the AV crew. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out for a talk and hopefully a good discussion about the downtown secondary plan. So as Ryan said, I'm Jason Thorne. I'm the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the plan and how we got here. And then myself and Steve Robichaud, who's the city's chief planner, will be here for some Q&A with Ryan, as well as some questions from the audience. So I want to start by saying that the title of the talk was the secondary plan. But there's actually three different elements that we've just released for public review and that are going to Planning Committee next week on April the 17th for adoption. And I will note that meeting on April the 17th on Tuesday is the statutory public meeting at Council with Planning Committee. So anybody who's interested in making comments to Council, that is your opportunity to do so. But there's actually three different components, and I'm going to speak a little bit to elements that are contained within all of them. So there is the secondary plan, but one of the different things that we've done is maybe a little bit different from some how other municipalities approach this is we didn't want to release the secondary plan and then have that 2-year gap while you wait for the zoning to then be brought up to be in conformity with the secondary plan, and then you wait another year to come up with design guidelines as to how do you want the secondary plan implemented. One of the unique things that we've done that I think is important is we're putting them all out together. So that we will have the policies in place, we'll have the zoning in place, we'll have the guidelines in place all at the same time to guide development. So those are the three elements. Just a quick shot of the geography for those of you who don't know. This is the area that we're talking about as the downtown, as it's defined in the city's official plan. So roughly from Victoria to Queen, going east and west. To the north at Cannon Street, although we have that kind of little leg going a little further up James Street to the GO station, and then to the south at Hunter Street, and then again another little bit of a leg going a little further south down to Charlton. So when we talk about the downtown in the official plan, this is the geography that we are talking about. So the format for my presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm not planning on standing up here and giving you a planning lecture or a policy 101 about everything that's into the secondary plan. I'm not going to go through it chapter by chapter by chapter. We had a public open house actually last night where we had display panels and staff on hand to provide that kind of information and to answer specific questions about the policies. The Useful Knowledge Society, when they approached me, they said, there are groups about building knowledge and building community capacity. So what they asked me to talk about was, talk a little about the story behind the plan. How did we get here? What are some of the issues that we wrestled with? So that's what I'm going to focus my talk on. And I'll end with a few of the highlights of the policies, but certainly we can get into those more during the Q&A. So I'm going to start with what is a secondary plan. So there's citywide, there's a document called the city's official plan. That's the master planning document that guides growth and development across the entire city. A secondary plan is like a chapter within that official plan. So it's a neighborhood-specific chapter within the official plan. So you have in the official plan policies that affect the entire city, and then we have secondary plans for Ainslie Wood. We have secondary plans for the Centennial neighborhoods, for the Ancaster area, and for the downtown. And these provide specific policy direction tailored to the unique circumstances of that geography. Important to note about a secondary plan, it essentially it forms part of the official plan. It has the same weight and status of the official plan, and it is not easy to change. So if somebody wants to make an application, do a development that doesn't conform to the official plan, they have to apply for amendment. I can tell you that takes approximately a year. You're going to be paying a $20,000 application fee. You're going to be incurring tens of thousands in planning studies. if you want to make a change from what's in the official plan. So that's the importance of the policies that we're talking about here tonight. There's no such thing as a minor change to the official plan. If there's something in the official plan and you say, well, what I want to do is almost meet the test, but not quite, we don't have the ability to say, it's close enough, go ahead. You have to conform to the official plan, and if you don't, you're in for a full-scale amendment. There's some new rules as well that will freeze any amendments on the official plan for a 2-year period. So this is a pretty important document. I also want to talk about what a secondary plan is not. So first of all, the secondary plan is not the entire official plan. So if you're reading the secondary plan and you're looking for certain policy directions and you don't see them there, it may be because they already exist in what we call the parent official plan. So we don't repeat it. If it's already in the policies that apply to the whole city, we don't repeat it again in the secondary plan for the downtown. Just to give one example, because we've been asked this one, condominium conversions is a question we're often asked. You won't see anything much about condominium conversions in the secondary plan because there's already a policy that exists citywide in the official plan, and there's other examples like that. It's also not an everything plan for the downtown. Fundamentally, it is a land use planning document. Its purpose is to guide growth and development. So it doesn't establish tax rates. It doesn't establish, it's not the mechanism through which grants or incentives are delivered. It doesn't set funding priorities. It doesn't set budgeting. It doesn't direct how services are delivered, how community outreach programs are delivered. It's not just here's everything that everybody wants to do in the downtown. It is a land use planning document, and its purpose is to guide growth and development. Well, the plan can permit or prohibit certain uses. It can't dictate who the user is. So for example, in an official plan, we can permit retail uses, but we can't require it to be a grocery store. We can permit a restaurant, but we can't preclude a chain restaurant and say, well, we only want local independent retailers. We can just regulate the use, not who's making the use. If you have a larger unit, we can't dictate that only a family with children shall move into that unit. That's not the kind of thing you can do in a secondary plan. You can only create the broad permissions. And you also can't force change to happen. So I know we have lots of vacant lots downtown. We have lots of vacant buildings, and we would love to see those developed and changed and revitalized. We can't force a property owner to do anything with their properties. All we can do is set the rules and put the rules in place where if they do want to change their properties, what can they and can they not do. And lastly, a secondary plan is not a zoning bylaw, and that's why these are two separate documents that we're bringing forward at the same time. So a secondary plan sets some of the broader policy direction, and then a zoning bylaw establishes specific standards to implement that secondary plan. One of the important differences there is a zoning bylaw is also not easy to amend. If you want to develop something and it doesn't meet the zoning bylaw, if it's completely different than what we've got the zoning set at, again, you're making an application, you're probably looking at a year, you're looking at a $20,000 application, and again, tens of thousands of dollars in consulting fees to justify your proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw. But there's one important difference, and that is that in a zoning bylaw, you can make an application for a small change, for a minor variance. So that's why something like a building setback, if we're going to say your building has to be set back 2 meters. If we say that in the official plan and you want to go 2.1 meters, you got to amend the entire plan. But in the zoning bylaw, we can say, well, that's pretty close. Apply for a minor variance. You go to committee of adjustment. It's a smaller fee. It's a less onerous process to make small, minor changes to the zoning bylaw. And finally, there's the design guidelines. That's the third document that we have out right now. And this is where we want to create some of the direction around urban design, around good form. And these are guidelines. This is not this third one here, the final one, is not a statutory document. It just provides guidance to development, and I'll come to in a moment why that's important. So that's as much planning 101 you're going to get. And I'm just going to very quickly talk about how we got here, because this plan has been a long time in coming. The current plan we're dealing with was from 2001, so it has been in place for quite some time, and it was done at a time when the issues and opportunities in the downtown were very different than what they are today. So the current review actually kicked off in 2011, so again, quite some time ago. We had some visioning workshops back then. The plan, we did take a bit of a hiatus in 2013-14, and then relaunched the process in 2015. So I don't expect to be able to read this slide from where you are. But this captures that we had about 7 different community liaison meetings, 10 different public information centers, open houses. We went in front of the design review panel, I think 3 or 4 times. And this is actually the 3rd version of the secondary plan that we've released. So we released a draft back in May of last year. We got some feedback on that. We released a new draft in October of last year, got some feedback on that. And now this 3rd version is the one that we're ready to take to council and recommend. So as I said, I'm not going to go through policy by policy. I'm more going to talk about some of the issues that we wrestled with and debated about and researched and discussed as we tried to come up with the appropriate policy environment for the downtown. And I'm actually going to start with this one, because I think this is kind of important. I'm sure many of you know these words on the screen. NIMBY, not in my backyard. YIMBY, yes in my backyard. Does anybody know banana? Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. On TIMBY, this was a new one to me that I recently learned. Only good things in my backyard. And I put this up here because, unfortunately, I think often when you're having discussion around something like a secondary plan and the future vision for an areas of work of the downtown, far too often we try to categorize people and their views into one of these categories. And I don't agree with that, and I think that's not what's been happening. I think we've been having a very good debate and discourse over the last couple of years. And I would say that just because you think protecting heritage is important does not make you a NIMBY. Just because you think that creating more opportunities for more people to come downtown and create new housing supply, that doesn't make you a YIMBY who just says, well, people should just build whatever they want. These are kind of labels and categories that I think sometimes they're used to marginalize important views and important discussions. And so I want to put that out there right off the start. The second issue is that this is the plan for the downtown, but you can't separate it from the plan for the overall city. We have in place for the city a desired urban structure, of which the downtown is really the primary node and growth node within the city. But it's important to get the downtown right in order to get our entire urban structure right. It's an urban structure that is trying to shift growth and development away from the edge, away from the farmlands and the green fields and the natural areas and the rural areas at the edge of our city, and focus more and more growth into our existing urban area. And this is the plan that has to take us down that path and achieve that overall urban structure. It's also important to note that the downtown has different roles for different people. So for some people, this is the area where they work. They come to work every day and they go home. For some, this is the area where they go out for an evening on the weekend, to a restaurant, to a shop, to go to enjoy some of the shopping downtown. For other people, this is where they live. This is their neighborhood, and navigating that balance between a downtown that is a great and vibrant and dense urban place, but also a great neighborhood, a place where you feel comfortable walking your kids down the street, a place where you can take your dog for the walk, that has shops and restaurants that are exciting and great, but also has grocery stores and hardware stores and the kinds of things that you need for day-to-day living if this is your neighborhood. That's an important part of the balance that we have to try to achieve as we're developing the plan. And related to that is we need more than just condos. And by more than just condos, I mean it's not a plan that just desires to have more and more residential development. How do we also make sure we're attracting retail uses and service uses and employment uses so that people have that opportunity to live, work, shop, play, worship, all in this downtown that is also an important neighborhood. Then of course there's this one. This is always one of the most contentious issues anytime you're doing a land use plan anywhere. Downtown Hamilton has been no exception. There is the question, well, should you have height limits at all in development? Should you just make it open-ended? Or if you do want to have height limits, what should those limits be? So this is always a contentious debate, a contentious discussion, and there really are a number of considerations. Most often we talk about the design considerations. So we talk about shadows, we talk about sky views, overlook impacts on adjacent properties, overwhelming or crowding the street, but also filling in some of the gaps, filling in the gaps in our streetscape, defining our skyline. These are all important design considerations that are tied back to height. But it's not just design, there's economic considerations as well. One of the issues that has concerned me is if you don't have limits, if you don't have any particular rules in place, expectations in place about how much density is going to be permitted, that can create market uncertainty. that can affect your land values, that can affect your development market, and that starts to drive some speculative land values, and that's a concern. There are market considerations. What is a reasonable market absorption rate to expect? I can tell you that we do probably about 300 or so units in the downtown on a given year. So this is an important question. Even if that grows, do we want that to be captured in one 60-story building or two 30-story buildings? There's a limited absorption, a limited market. How do you actually want to spread that around and accommodate that in the downtown? And then how do height limits affect housing supply? And obviously related to that is how does it affect affordability, and I'll get to that in a moment. We also have to think about market viability. There's no point writing a great plan with all sorts of great policies if it's not actually going to be viable to build it, and if nobody's going to build it. We have to make sure that we're building the opportunity for the private sector, who's going to build most of these buildings, to make a reasonable profit so that they have a reason to invest. In our downtown, the development happening in our downtown is still incentivized development. All the development you see happening right now has taken advantage of one or more of the city's incentive programs that have been in place over the years in order to drive and encourage some of that development to come here. So whether that's our zero interest loan programs or development charge rebate programs, our tax deferral grants, these are all incentives that we have in place in order to encourage development to happen and support development to happening. So that's an important question. We think about how far can we push on questions of design, on questions of amenities, on questions of community benefits. We have to make sure that we aren't pushing to such an extent that we've made it not viable to actually build in this area. And then how do we maintain affordability? Another really key question, and one of the most significant ones we wrestled with as we were developing this plan. This is not entirely a land use issue, and it's not an issue that can be addressed entirely by land use solutions. As an area grows, as it improves, as it becomes more attractive, that affects values. And those values affect prices, and those prices affect who can stay, who can live here. And I'm not just talking here about residential. We also think about the affordability of retail spaces, the affordability of artist spaces. Now remembering that the plan is not the thing that establishes tax rates and creates incentives and rebate programs and that sort of thing, but it can help to create value. But it can also put in place some tools that, to some extent, allow the community to capture some of that value back and to reinvest it in things that are important to the community. And I'll get to some of those aspects of the plan in a moment. The next issue I want to talk about is certainty of design versus creativity of design. This is always a question when you're providing something like urban design guidelines, urban design standards and policies, things that affect or dictate or guide the form and character and appearance of development. You want to have some certainty in those areas. You want to make sure you're getting good design, but if you try to overly codify it, overly regulate it, then you're driving the creativity out of the development market. You're going to create sameness. So again, finding that balance between how much do we direct and require versus how much do we provide some flexibility for the market to respond to different circumstances. And I'll end with this one, which is planning for how we get around. It's been a long-standing goal of the city's official plan to shift how we move around in the city, to reduce reliance on private automobiles, encourage more use of transit, more use of walking, more cycling, and a secondary plan is an important contributor to that. But how do you plan for how we get around when we're kind of in that transition moment that Hamilton is in right now? We are still a community that, by a very large margin, is reliant on the automobile, that still uses the automobile for getting around. How do we plan for hopefully that changing in the future? So meeting that sort of that hope and expectation and vision for the future while making sure we're making desirable places to live and work today. So that's another significant issue that we wrestled with as we were going through the plan. So I'm coming close to my time in terms of how much time I said I was going to put into sort of the presentation before we get into the Q&A. So I'm just going to fly through a few of the highlights, and these are just a few of the highlights, and hopefully the Q&A we can dig into some of these in a little more detail. And I'll start here. So the plan really is focused on having a very diverse and flexible range of permitted uses. So most of the downtown area is designated for mixed use. And by mixed use, I mean residential is permitted, commercial retail uses are also permitted. Now, typically, it's permitted, but it's not required, but there are some exceptions. So on our commercial streets, on James Street, on our traditional commercial streets, it's not only permitted to be mixed use. It's actually required that the ground floor of your building be a commercial or retail use, so we maintain that commercial character of these streets. The other really important change in this plan is a continuation of something we've actually been doing with the zoning bylaws across the city, and that's create much more flexible zoning permissions. And what this little graphic here is intended to illustrate is the many, many ways that we used to define retail in the many different zoning bylaws that existed across a pre-amalgamation Hamilton. There's a similar graphic I could do showing restaurants where the zoning might permit takeout, fine dining, sit-down restaurants, commercial entertainment. Again, we had all of these different terms, and so that we're running into situations where if you wanted to change retail uses from selling one thing to selling another thing, in some cases you're having to come to City Hall and apply for a rezoning. We wanted to stop that practice. So we're creating much more flexible definition so that essentially in the zoning bylaw, retail is retail. We don't care what you're going to sell. Restaurants are restaurants. Commercial recreation is commercial recreation. So there should be a lot less need for process, for applications, if you want to change between these uses. But there are some things that aren't allowed. So the secondary plan has some prohibitions on what we consider lower density or auto-oriented uses. So service parking lots are not permitted. Single-story commercial uses are not permitted. Drive-throughs, car dealerships, these are kinds of things that are actually prohibited uses within the plan. On the question of height, and I'm sure we'll get into this more in the Q&A, what we've established is, and I can tell you this is one that came out a lot with the consultations we were having in the community about just how much people valued the fact that downtown Hamilton, Lower City, is framed by this magnificent landscape feature of the Niagara Escarpment. So what we've established is building heights that are tied back to that height of the Niagara Escarpment. So no buildings can be taller than the Niagara Escarpment. At the maximum point, so obviously, the topography of the downtown goes up and down a little bit. So if you're in a high point, you're going to be a little less. If you're in a low point, the maximum kind of building height you'll be able to hit is about 30 stories. It'll be less if you're in a high point. The idea being that Niagara Escarpment line is the peak that you will be allowed to achieve. And then related to that, we've also got some design policies and some zoning standards that are designed to make sure that we're not infringing upon those south views of the Niagara Escarpment. As you're standing down some of our north-south streets and you can see through to the Niagara Escarpment, we don't want new development crowding in on those views. We've identified some specific Niagara Escarpment views that will also be protected as development proceeds. Similar to that, the previous map I showed is one of the height schedules from the plan. And there's always this tendency when a plan comes out is you flip to the height schedule and you look at the number and you say, okay, I'm permitted 80 meters or 90 meters or 70 meters or whatever it may be. The key thing to remember is that those are your potential height maximums, but there are other considerations as well. There's other policies that have to be taken into account. In fact, the plan actually very clearly states that the height permissions contained on those maps and schedules may not be achievable depending on the context of your site. And these are some of the things that can limit those heights or limit how those buildings are oriented on the site. So for example, we have very specific policies around providing adequate sunlight on plazas, patios, sidewalks, and so on. So that could affect the height of a building, it could affect the orientation of a building, it could affect the massing of the building to make sure that those shadow impacts are not exceeded. And on some of our really key public spaces like Agora Park, no net increase on shadows on those places. And then there's some other policies as well. So we have requirements around minimum tower separation. So you can't get a wall of towers. You have to have at least 25 meters between towers so you can maintain those sky views. So these are important potential limitations on what the achievable heights are on a given site. And another limitation is that we want new development to make sure it's respecting context, or respecting character of what's already there. So we have policies around how higher density development transitions to lower density development around it. We also have policies, and this is an interesting one that came out of the city's music working group. I don't know if anybody here is from that group, but a couple of years back, working with the music industry, the city adopted a music strategy to really position Hamilton as a music city. And one of the things that they had expressed concerns about, this is going back a couple of years, was around the potential for growth and development in the city to start to infringe upon our really key and iconic music venues. We've seen that happen in other cities. We've seen that happen in London and New York, and we're starting to see it in Toronto. So one of the policies we put in place was one we borrowed from the UK. It's the agent of change principle. So if you have a new residential development going in next to one of the music venues, it's that new residential development, that agent of change, that's actually responsible for mitigating the impacts on the music venues. They can do that in a number of ways. They can do that through their through the glazing of their windows, to the orientation of the building, the orientation of the balconies, where they locate their amenity spaces. These are the kinds of things we'll be looking for, because what we don't want to be in a situation is where some of these venues become surrounded by residential development, and then the complaints coming out of that residential development starts to squeeze out some of these venue spaces. We have some enhanced protections for heritage buildings as well. So there's requirements for new development to be compatible with any on-site or adjacent heritage properties. And we've also introduced, I think, a very innovative new mechanism for protecting heritage buildings. And what we've done is, although the zoning permits development, permits all of those densities and heights that I've been talking about, there's actually, in some cases, a holding provision on those zones, which means you can't develop until you lift that holding provision, and to lift that holding provision, you've got to do a cultural heritage impact assessment of any heritage properties. And what we're trying to do with that is get away from this situation where we're being very reactive. So the city has put a lot of effort into inventorying the heritage buildings we have in our downtown. Over the past 3 years, I think something like 1,500 buildings have been added to the heritage registry in the lower city. And what we want to be able to do is to say, we don't want to be in this, a gun to our head. We have a few days to decide, and applications have made to knock down a heritage building. We got to rush to council with an emergency heritage designation. These are the kinds of situations we've gotten ourselves into in the past. So by holding that zoning, it gives us time to have that heritage impact assessment, do the evaluation, see if there are ways that that building can be either accommodated within the development, adaptively reused, or at minimum, if you're looking at some sort of documentation and salvage and reuse of some of the materials. So those are some new protections that we have in place for heritage. And I'll end with this one, because this speaks to the issue of affordable housing, which again, I said was one of those issues that we really wrestled with in developing the plan. And there's a couple of things that the plan does which are going to be new for the downtown. The first one relates to community benefits. So we're proposing the plan to use a tool of the Planning Act. It's called Section 37 bonusing for any planners in the room. And again, what we've done is we said, even though your height permissions may be, let's say, 30 stories, your as-of-right permission is held at 44 meters. So that's, look at Steve, that's 12, 13 stories, something in that range. Your zoning permissions as of right are held there. And if you want to go to the full height permissions of 30 stories, then you have to enter into a community benefits agreement with the city. And that community benefits agreement could be tied to a few things that we've listed in the plan, affordable housing being one of those. So that's a way of trying to extract from the development some of that value uplift that's being created and return that into community benefits to the community. We also have looked at the replacement of rental units. So as you know, in the downtown core, we have a lot of often informal rental units. Often these are older homes that may have been divided into 7, 8 units over time. If these sites are going to be redeveloped, what we're calling for is that those rental units have to be replaced. And we'll also be looking for a tenant relocation and assistance plan for the people who are living in those buildings, and a plan to rehouse them when the new development is complete. And then thirdly, looking at family-sized units. So there's limitations on what we can do in terms of requiring family-sized units, but we do have one new incentive that we're putting into the plan, and that's a reduced parking requirement for family-sized units, which may not sound like a big thing, but a parking space in a condo in a structured parking garage is about $40,000. So a parking space is an expensive thing to provide. So what we're suggesting is we have, across the board, we've reduced the parking requirements for development downtown, but typically for a larger unit, it's around 0.5 to 0.7 parking spaces per unit. But if it's a 3-bedroom unit, we drop that down to 0.3. So there's a lower parking requirement, hopefully as a bit of a financial incentive to put more of these kinds of scale units into buildings. So that was a fly through of some highlights. I hope it was not too planning jargony, but I'm a planner, so sometimes I speak in planning jargon. I am going to, before we go to the Q&A, I do want to sort of acknowledge and thank Christine Newbold is here. She's the manager of the group who's been putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing for the past couple of years, and leads a really great team of planners who've done, I think, some really exceptional research, looking at some of the best practices that are out there. I also want to thank some of the folks in the room who, I recognize some faces here, who have been with us for the past couple of years. Some of the folks from the neighborhood associations who've participated in our open houses, who've commented on all of the various drafts that have come through that we've put out and collected your feedback. I do hope you'll see some of your thoughts and ideas and commentary reflected in what we're proposing. because it really has been a long time in getting here. But my hope is that we've hit the right balance, we've hit the right sweet spot in terms of an appropriate plan for the downtown. So I will leave it at that, and then I think I'm calling Ryan up to the stage to moderate the Q&A. Thank you.
You'll notice Jason had a much easier time getting up onto the stage than I did. So first of all, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Actually, about half of the questions I prepared have been answered, so I'm going to sort of skip across a few of them. Before we go any farther, Mary Louise asked me to say this, that the Useful Knowledge Society is a voluntary organization. We're not even a not-for-profit. We're just a group of people that get together and organize these things. And these events do cost some money to put together. You don't need a lot, we need a little bit. And if you feel like making donations, I believe there's a place to leave donations at the back. Oh, Mary Louise. Oh, there's literally a hat that's going to be passed around, so please consider throwing a couple of bucks in. We'll really appreciate it. It's on the bar. It's on the bar. It just allows us to continue putting on these kinds of events, and I certainly always come out edified and inspired by these, so I just wanted to say thank you for that. Okay, one second. I should apologize also, I've got sort of a nasty cold, I'm heavily medicated right now, so if I stop making sense, just kind of wave at me. Give me the, so anyhow, before we get any farther, before we get into the weeds, and we will get into the weeds, but I wanted to start kind of high level. It occurs to me that you're both planning professionals and that you're not elected officials yourself, but that you're not coming into this process as a blank slate. And I'd like to know, what is your vision for the downtown? You know, looking out 10, 20 years, what does success look like?
That's a great question. For me, I think there's a lot of things already happening really well in the downtown. I think as someone who grew up here in the 80s and 90s, I remember the downtown when there was very little change, where there was a lot of stagnation. It's great to see some of the development and investment happening, and I can tell you as a planner, we can only write plans. And I've worked in situations where you're writing plans in a community that just isn't experiencing any investment, isn't experiencing any growth, and that can be a pretty disheartening process. The great thing about doing planning in Hamilton right now, and especially downtown Hamilton right now, is all of the kind of clay of city building is there. So the growth and development is happening. So as we write plans and policies, we can envisage them actually turning into real projects. And that's just much more heartening than I think where Hamilton was at a generation or two ago. I think in terms of where I would like to see Hamilton, downtown Hamilton get, I think we can accommodate a lot more people down here. I would like to see a lot more people in our parks, in our green spaces, on our streets. We've made great strides, I think, in addressing some of the issues of vacancies, but we still have, we're still looking at 10% storefront vacancies in the downtown. We used to be at 20%, so 10% is getting better, but we still have opportunities there. I love the fact that Hamilton, that downtown Hamilton has a very diverse range of housing types. We have just put every type of housing you can imagine in the downtown core. I want to see that continue. I don't want to see a sea of buildings that all have bachelor apartments in them. I want to make sure that we're continuing to have great, vibrant neighborhoods of detached homes and semis and townhomes and condos and multis. I think that's one of the things that really makes Hamilton great. I think the heritage buildings is one of the things that makes downtown Hamilton particularly attractive. I hear that a lot from people who are coming to Hamilton, that that's one of the things that attracted them to it. So we need to make sure that that's not lost as the city changes. Downtown Hamilton, some people don't necessarily realize this, it's the largest employment node in the city. We have 25,000 jobs in downtown Hamilton. I'd like to see that continue and to see that grow. And as a great entertainment district as well. So it's great that we have a downtown where we're not trying to create from scratch any of these things. The seeds of each of those things is already here. We just have to make sure that we're nurturing those and that we're not squeezing any of those out. And then there's the issue of affordability and equity and making sure that it's still a place where people of all socioeconomic means can find a place and can feel welcome.
Thank you, Jason. And building on that, I think one of the things that's really important is Hamilton is a real city, and maintaining what that means to be a real city. There's other communities out there, they have the population size, so they call themselves a city, but they don't have those elements that are unique to Hamilton. And I think it's that industrial legacy, it's the history, the heritage buildings, all of those things really contribute to what makes Hamilton in the sense of place very important. I can remember in 1989, you would go to Jackson Square at lunchtime, and if you weren't there early, like 11:30, you were not getting a seat if you wanted to sit outside and eat. And when you can sort of bring back that level of energy in terms of employment, population after hours and staying there, that's what really would make Hamilton very successful. And of course, ideally, we are going to see the LRT in the downtown.
Yay!
And I think that's one of the major organizing frameworks around the downtown secondary plan. When you look at the land use arrangements, one of the policy decisions that we made, it's to support that investment in LRT and make sure that we get to maximize those public return or in private investment returns on that public sector investment.
So, gentlemen, could I ask that you just straighten up because Jason's in the shadow, and that really affects how you're on television. And then see, there's a second microphone so we don't have to hand the sounds of moving the mics. So, Jason, is there any that when I can't see him talking, so that's actually the problem.
I'm trying to stay out of the way,
Yeah, well, I want to camera at you all the time. I know. That's a lot better. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to poke the bear a little bit and talk a little bit about this 30-story limit because I realize that you're getting kind of criticized in both directions on this. People who are concerned about over-intensification are saying that it's too high, and people who are excited at the prospect of some real kind of signature tall buildings feel that it's too low. And I've heard the argument, and I keep hearing the argument that it's based on the height of the escarpment, and so you suggested there's some nuance on a site-by-site level in terms of the various elevations. But but 3 weeks ago I went for a walk along the escarpment. I started at the top of Wentworth Stairs and just walked, looked kind of various different directions from there, from a few different points on St. Lawrence Park, and then from the top of West 5th with Claremont access. And right now, the only building that sticks out is Landmark Place, and to be honest, I would like that not to be the only building that's taller than the escarpment right now. So I understand that there's lots of competing interests, but I wonder if it feels a little bit arbitrary. So I'm going to kind of push just a little bit on that.
So maybe I'll start with kind of just talking about the, where we arrived at, should there even be a height limit at all. Let Steve speak to some of the analysis that was sort of done around the escarpment heights. Because there is certainly a constituency who would suggest that there should just be no height limits. If the market wants to build a 60-story building, they should build a 60-story building, and that's a way of bringing in a lot of housing supply into a community. One of the concerns I have with that is, and I spoke to it a little bit in the presentation, is the potential that has to really distort a housing market if you don't have any sort of certainty in terms of what your available permissions are on the site. When a person buys a piece of land, they do a very careful analysis. They say, okay, what can I build on this land? What yield can that generate? What can I sell that for? And that then influences the price of that piece of land. If that's uncertain, if you don't know when you purchase a piece of land, is it going to be a 10-story? Could it be a 10-story, a 20-story, or an 80-story building? That's what starts to drive some of the speculative land pressure on that pricing. And once you have that, if you're purchasing property on an assumption of a 40 or 50-story building, then that becomes a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle that you better get a 40 or 50-story building or you're not going to get your return on your investment. And I have a bit of a fear that downtown Hamilton's doing really well, but we still aren't building a ton of units. As I said, we're still in sort of the 300 or so units per year. That's not a huge absorption rate to be absorbing a lot of really significant, robust 50, 60-story towers. And we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of vacant sites that I think would be great to see turn over into development. So it's a question of trying to find that right balance as to what height limit makes sense for your market, makes sense for your real estate market, for your land values, for your absorption rates, for your growth rates, is trying to find that kind of sweet spot. And I think if you don't do that, the risk you run is that properties start to flip and turn at unreasonable prices, and you actually create a chill in the market where nobody can actually build out or develop a site because they can't get the return to justify those land prices. And then we're waiting for another generation for the residential house values to catch up to what the land prices were. So those are some of the concerns that when we're talking about heights, you have to think beyond just sort of design and just beyond the, well, it doesn't look so bad. The height permissions and the density permissions you put in place have a lot of other ripple effects into other aspects that really quite significantly and profoundly can affect development.
I think I'm building on that. Early in my planning career when I first started in Hamilton, people were talking about, should buildings be taller than the escarpment? What does Hamilton Mountain mean? It's really unique to the Hamilton psyche, the idea of Hamilton Mountain. And it's both looking, if you're standing on the escarpment, should you be looking up at a high rise that's actually taller than the escarpment? And then conversely, when you're looking at the way that the escarpment frames the downtown, it's a very important characteristic. So I use the analogy, it's like in your living room. The escarpment becomes the living room wall, and then the buildings are the furniture that you organize within that living space. And then it's a relationship between the buildings or the furniture and the wall in that room, and how do you create that unique sense of place and that sense of identity. And I think building on what Jason is saying is, we don't want Hamilton to be the best place to speculate. You want it to be the best place to invest so that translates into development. And it's those speculative pressures that we're trying to discourage and actually having it translating into investments leading to development and actually bricks and mortar, not just going through a planning approval for the sake of creating an artificial paper value of a 60-story building. And conversely, when we started looking and doing the analysis, we said that with a 30-story building cap within the downtown area, there's still a large number of units that can be created. So we can still meet or exceed all of our provincial growth targets. It allows for opportunities for choice within the downtown where development can and cannot occur. Not every site then has to develop at a maximum density or a prescribed density. We see that happening, within the Gore area, where you can actually underdevelop relative to some of the planning permissions and still create attractive and high quality development within the downtown. So it was trying to balance a series of objectives and then community values in terms of how do you what do you want to see in the downtown.
Thank you. That's a very good point about the creating that kind of speculative chain reaction. So a bit more kind of in the height area. I'm going to kind of back down a little bit. I liked what you had to say about the lower as of right with an opportunity for some density bonusing. This was one of the questions I was planning on asking about. So that answers the first part of the question I had. But the second part is that if you look at the situation in Toronto, so density bonusing is basically, as Jason suggested, it's Section 37 of the Planning Act, and it allows a city to negotiate with the developer to agree to a higher height limit in exchange for some community benefits. So in Toronto, this tool has been used fairly widely, and it's a little bit controversial because there's a kind of let's make a deal quality to it. The individual councillor negotiates directly with the developers, and there's been some question in some cases as to whether the community benefit was really as significant as suggested. So, for example, the city of Vaughan has they have a municipal policy around how to implement density bonusing, which is inclusive and transparent, and it brings in stakeholders who kind of have to agree that this actually is a community benefit. So I wonder, are we putting those kinds of processes, are we looking at some of the best practices and making sure we don't make the same mistakes that Toronto's made in the past?
Yeah, we have it. And I mentioned we have a very good planning staff for the city, and I think what they've come up with is a really novel approach to using Section 37 that frankly I think is going to start to get copied all over the place. Because one of the things it's designed to do is to avoid some of the very things that you're talking about, and to use the Toronto experience. I think one of the concerns with bonusing in the Toronto experience is, I'm going to oversimplify a little bit, but that you artificially underzone a site and you say, okay, we're going to say your zoning permission is 6 stories, and you know full well that no one's ever building a 6-story. And then it's kind of open-ended what you can do on the top end. So somebody comes in and says, okay, as of right, I get 6 stories, but what's it going to cost me in community benefits to get 60 or 70? And there's not that kind of rigor on the top end as to what's actually permitted. So what Hamilton is proposing to do, what was proposed in the plan, I think is a really novel approach, that we're defining the upper limit. So doesn't matter how much Section 37 benefits you derive, you're not going over the height of the Niagara Escarpment, which is that 30-story limit. That's why the zoning actually establishes that as your uppermost zoning permission. And then it establishes your as-of-right permission at 44 meters and says, okay, where we're going to extract some bonusing, some community benefits, is to get from that 44 meters to your upper limit. Because it is trying to avoid that let's make a deal planning where 40 stories gets you a park and 80 stories gets you a rec center, and that's not the kind of situation you want to do. I don't think that's fair to the development community, because they don't know then. They don't know what the rules are. They don't know how to do a pro forma of a development if they don't know what the height permission is going to be and what it's going to cost them. And it's certainly not fair to the community, because then you have no idea what's actually going to go into that property next to you. Maybe it's a 30-story building, maybe it's a 60-story building. We didn't want to have that kind of uncertainty out there. So that's why it's structured the way it is. Now, what's still to come is then we have to say, if council adopts this plan and adopts this Section 37 bonusing approach, then we have to get into the details of actually how is that policy going to get played out. And again, something that we've looked at some of the best practices, and actually we had Thorne come in and do a workshop with council a little while back. And one of the things that I like about the Thorne approach is it's very upfront and transparent. So it's not like you are going behind closed doors to meet with staff and politicians and somebody comes up with a dollar figure, you all agree, and you walk out the door and you got a deal. It's very clear. We say these are the land values going to be based on, this is the formula we're going to use, this is how we're going to do the math. So again, a developer, when they buy a property, knows what they're getting into, knows what they can expect, and then it's very transparent to the public and the communities and how those public benefits were derived. So.
And one of the other things that we've done is, like Jason was saying, in volume 1 of our official plan, it lists a whole range of items that would be eligible for Section 37 benefits. But in the downtown secondary plan, we went from that long list of 10 or 15 elements and we scoped it down to 5 elements. And that's based on the feedback we got from the community around affordable housing, community benefits, parkland, and transit improvements. So those would be the only elements that a bonusing payment or facilities would be eligible for, as opposed to a developer offering to do something that may not necessarily be what the community wants. We're also right now, staff are working on developing a Section 37 bonusing protocol, and we hope to be bringing forward that to council and some community consultation and stakeholder engagement, and then wrap it up here probably in early 2019 for council endorsement, and that'll put a formalized process around how we deal with Section 37. And the province did also amend legislation. There was a lot of criticism about Toronto and how those funds were being used. So 2 years ago, I think with Bill 73, they made changes to the Planning Act and Municipal Act, and now municipalities have to very clearly report on how the money is being collected, how it's being invested, and then how that money is being used, so that anybody can say, okay, that payment, it went into the account, 2 years later, it was spent in this way, and that's the way the municipality used that money for affordable housing or parkland, or alternatively, where we get those facilities provided directly by the developer, we can do that annual reporting, so it becomes a very clear and transparent process.
Thank you. Now, in your presentation, you drew sort of a distinction between the secondary plan, the zoning bylaw, and the design guidelines. And so it's possible that I may be blurring that distinction a little bit, but as people probably know, I'm a bit of a Jane Jacobs fanboy. She's one of my heroes. And in the early 90s, when she was living in Toronto, she was part of a committee that put together the King Spadina secondary plan, which was a plan for, won't surprise you to learn, the area around Spadina and King, Toronto. And at the time, it was a pretty run-down, kind of old industrial warehouse area. There was not a lot of investment. There was not a lot of much of anything there. The city established a secondary plan, and they also built the Spadina, I'm going to call it the LRT, it's sort of an LRT light, based on the definition that we're using today. But they invested in rapid transit, and they came up with a secondary plan that instead of a zoning-based approach, it was more of a, and I realize I'm sitting with two planners, so I may be about to stick my foot in my mouth, but it took a form-based approach, which, instead of sort of saying, as you say, we want this type of use in this location, this type of use in this location, the secondary plan was more about, this is how a building, this is how a building opens onto the sidewalk. There were no parking requirements, but if you do have parking, they have to be under the building or behind the building. And this was, of course, Jane Jacobs' innovation, is that she believed that If you get the form right, then the use will figure itself out. So I guess the question is, to what extent is kind of a form-based approach informing the secondary plan process for downtown Hamilton?
So it is, to some extent, it's certainly in that vein. I mean, in the extreme, the form-based approach is, and even the Kings didn't quite go here. In the extreme, the form-based approach is we're going to define the box, how big the box can be and where you can put the box and how far the box has to be set back from the street. What you do inside the box, we don't care. This isn't quite that. We do have policies to define the box. So that's, you find that in the, a lot of that is in the zoning in terms of the heights and the setbacks and how setbacks have to work on upper stories. And then the design guidelines elaborate that a bit further. We've tried to be very flexible in terms of what you can do inside the box, but it's certainly not you can do whatever you want inside the box. So that's why I said the use permissions, most of the downtown is mixed use, so it's going to permit residential, it's going to permit commercial. But for example, on a James Street, what we didn't want to do is say, okay, we don't want to start seeing residential front doors opening up onto James Street. We want to make sure that it's maintained as ground floor retail. So it's not a complete open-ended, any use goes inside the boxes. We do have some limitations. But it is trying to get to be much more flexible. We're not saying, that you can have a shoe store and a hardware store and a grocery store, but not this kind of store. It says retail uses, restaurant uses. So they are much broader, more flexible. I'm not sure if that answered your question. I guess my answer is kind of mostly, but not entirely.
I guess the idea in Kings Spadina was things like you couldn't, for example, have an off-street parking lot between the sidewalk and the building. And it sounds like you sort of alluded to that in your presentation, that this is not going to allow for suburban style off-street parking, on surface lot kind of uses. So then a surface lot as part of development is also not allowed?
Yeah, I think we try to describe not, it's more what we don't want to see. So to your point is we do not want to see a sea of parking in front of a one-story strip plaza at James and Bay, sort of from that perspective. We've also looked at it from the lens that if you have an existing building, we provided the maximum flexibility, saying that that building, the uses can change over time. You're not going to have to keep going to the committee of adjustment for more parking or setbacks or GFA ratios or splits between res and non-res. We allow for that sort of organic and ongoing change within existing buildings. What we were trying to do is a little bit more prescriptive for new development to make sure that new development is compatible with existing development, and we don't end up in that situation where the new development is overpowering the sidewalk, or we're getting sun shadow impacts or other negative impacts related to that new development. So that's the lens we've taken on it. So the zoning, I think, is fairly flexible from that perspective, from a use perspective, and we've tried to remove those barriers to allowing businesses or uses to change within those buildings over time.
And just for one anecdote about the importance of this change, so not too many years ago, some people I knew wanted to open a little shop on Lock Street, and they had a zoning verification study done, and they found out that this particular spot they were looking to lease was zoned to sell antiques or fireplaces. So things are a little more flexible than that, and I think that's a good thing. I'd like to talk a little bit more about affordability, because you mentioned in your presentation that affordable housing is one of the considerations. Certainly the density bonusing, I see an opportunity there. The province also is developing new inclusionary zoning regulations. So if you have a project with more than 20 units, and if it's condos rather than rentals, the city will have the opportunity to specify that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that 5% of the units have to be affordable, or 10% if it's close to a transit node, and up at 40% of the cost differential to add those affordable units would be covered by the city. So that's been criticized for not going far enough. So I wonder, what is the city doing, or what can the city do to go a little bit further to make sure, because the last thing we want, as you say, is a downtown that is a theme park for young single professionals, right? We want to maintain as much variety of housing as possible, and at a variety of different price points as well. So you give a bit more into the specifics of how we can ensure that as we're adding units in a variety of styles and for living arrangements.
Yeah. So in the inclusionary zoning, unfortunately, we don't know yet. So what you described was accurate in terms of what the draft proposal was coming out of the province. The city was one of many who pushed back a bit on that. And for example, some of the comments we sent back to the province suggested that requiring the city to make a financial contribution for any affordability was problematic. I think it'd be fair to suggest that your first 5% might be something you'd require the developer to provide, and the city could provide a financial benefit if there's more than that. Or if you want to, or there could be a certain level of affordability, and the city could provide a financial contribution if they wanted to go into deep affordability. So we had some concerns with the way that it was being proposed. The short answer is we don't know yet how the province is going to respond, and we're getting close to an election period, so I don't know if we're going to get something firm from them that we can actually utilize and build into our plans prior to the election. It is a potentially important and significant tool, though. If it does come forward, then I think we'll have some interesting conversations to have at the city around what is the better tool for achieving affordability? Do we look at Section 37 bonusing, which we built into the plan now, or does inclusionary zoning, are there circumstances where that's actually the better tool? My preference is give us as many tools as we can, and keep them as flexible as we can to adapt to some of the local circumstances. I think it would be great if we had an inclusionary zoning regime that gave us one more mechanism we can turn to in order to sort of extract some affordability out of projects. For now, we've used the one we've got. The one we've got is Section 37 bonusing. This is going to be new for the City of Hamilton. We haven't done it before, but it will be in there now if this plan is adopted, and that can make a contribution. I do want to make sure that bonusing is sort of one of those things that in some cases is looked at as the holy grail of affordability, that somehow that's going to solve the affordability issue. All Section 37 bonusing can do is extract a bit of the value out of some higher density developments. It's going to, its ability to deliver affordable housing is going to be limited. We're talking possibly a few units a year. This is not going to solve our waiting list of 7,000 people waiting for social housing in the city. Section 37 alone is not going to do it. Frankly, land use planning and zoning alone is not going to solve that issue. There is a component to be played by planners and by planning, but fundamentally, affordable housing is it really is a fundamental societal question about how we share wealth and value in the community that goes far beyond what mere planning tools can deliver.
I think when we were looking at developing the secondary plan, we wanted to protect what we have. So whether that's through the condominium conversion policies or as we built into the downtown secondary plan, that if you're going to be, there's an existing, say, fourplex, somebody buys the property, they want to demolish that fourplex and put up an 8-story apartment building, they have to replace those 4 units within that building at the rents that they were charging prior to the demolition occurring. So we don't want to be sort of adding 2 units through bonusing, but losing 6 or 8 units, so we're always sort of in a negative situation. So that was the first principle, was to protect what we have. And then bonusing, we can use that as an opportunity to sort of layer on, plus the inclusionary zoning. And I don't want to also lose sight of the work the city is already doing. So we waive development charges for affordable housing projects. We waive parkland dedication payments for affordable housing projects. And then we reimburse or waive the planning application fees for affordable housing projects. So we're trying to remove as many of those sort of financial barriers, and then also putting in place a regulatory planning framework to encourage and promote and protect affordable housing within the city.
Wonderful, thank you. So I've got just 2 more quick questions. Well, 2 questions. I don't know how quick they'll be. One of them is I just want to touch on what is this plan? What does it have to say about environmental standards? Because it occurs to me that if we're going to put a 30-story building, it's going to be there for decades, and it's going to be consuming energy for decades. And do you see a value or in setting some minimum standards for? It's never something you want to hear. I wonder, does it make sense to say if you're going to build this, you have to meet this R rating, or you have to manage your stormwater, or you have to generate some renewable power on site? Can we push developers to be a little bit more sustainable in how they're building?
Yes. So So yes, so there is some of that in the secondary plan that will be special, unique policy direction to downtown. There's also some already existing in the city's official plan. So the plan speaks to low impact development. So that would include things like retaining stormwater on site, looking at rainwater harvesting, green roofs, and also talks about design for energy sustainability. So white roofs, solar panels, those types of measures are talked about as some of the design expectations that we would have in the secondary plan.
Sounds great. And this is my last question. Oh, sorry, did you want to? No. Okay, so I'd like to preface this question by just saying that I'm really grateful that the two of you have agreed to come out and sit in front of so where I'm going with this is, in fact, I think the plan is actually better than I thought it was going to be before I came into, and that is, well, I think too, it's to your credit that going through the process, I think you have been listening and you have been looking for best practices, and I think you have been incorporating feedback. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of fear and a lot of maybe even suspicion in the community of people who are afraid that this is going to end up being too much of a blank check to developers and not, and sort of shortchanging the community. And I think certainly I didn't think that quite going into this, and I think less after hearing some more details about what's going to be in place. But it occurs to me that a lot of NIMBYism, and it's a term that I have used myself. I'm guilty of it from time to time, and it is somewhat dismissive. And it also occurs to me that a lot of it comes from people who participated in the system and followed the process and got burned. Whether it was inspiring, mitigating promises in a project that were winnowed away in the Committee of Adjustment, or whether it was a building facade that didn't look anything like the shiny rendering, and people end up with a building that's sort of as bad as they were afraid of. What can you do? What are you doing to kind of understand those fears and to mitigate or to assuage them? Like how is this plan going to be better than some of the things that we've had to deal with in the past?
Try to address a lot of those issues. So one of the big changes in the province, it says you can't apply to amend this plan 2 years from the date of adoption. So that allows a bit of certainty, allows the plan to get traction, and we start to implementing the plan. The old plan, one of the concerns that we had when we started reviewing the old plan was it laid out land uses and heights, but then it said, if you give us a sun shadow study and a wind study, you can do whatever you want. Because you can go to the Committee of Adjustment, you can get a minor variance, and you can go from 6 stories to 40 stories, and it happened in the downtown. So when we rewrote the plan, we wanted to be very clear in the language as to what permissions were being granted, and then the process if you want to change those planning permissions. So if somebody has a site that's designated only for 6 stories and they want to go to 30 stories, there's no more giving us a couple of studies and going to the Committee of Adjustment and convincing the Committee of Adjustment it's a good thing and getting the approvals. It has to go through a rigorous planning approvals process to amend the plan and to outline that process that gets laid out. Even though we built into the plan and said where we're giving you those planning permissions, we still require the developers before they can proceed with the process to provide all the necessary studies and documents and the urban design guidelines to ensure that they're implementing the plan. We also rely on the advice of our design review panel, and they've been very critical in this panel especially, and they're pushing back more and more in terms of the development community, and we're trying to get that message out that it's, years ago people used to come into the city and say, you should be lucky I'm investing in the downtown, you should be grateful I'm here, just give me my approvals and let me do what I want to do. Now the message is, no, the community expects more, the city expects more from you, go back and redo your plans. And that does cause some tension going back and forth, being forced to redesign the plans and improving it, so we've been trying to do that and raise the bar on an ongoing basis. We are looking at the way we use our incentives, to use the incentives not only to encourage development, but other tools that we can use the incentives to discourage people from trying to abuse the plan or make changes to the plan that we don't support. as well as ensuring that we are very open and transparent in our process. One of the things that Jason and I have been working on is how can we make as much information available to the public as early as possible, and also put in place a framework that helps to push that information out so you know when an application is coming in for a site plan or a minor variance application, as opposed to reacting when you get a letter in the mail or finding out 6 or 9 months after the fact. It's like, oh, if I had only known, I would have participated in the process. So that's actually a bigger sort of structural change that's been going on within the planning department, and it's something that we're committed to, and we're working, really making those investments in technology to make it easier for people to understand what's happening in the city hall, as opposed to having to rely on 1 or 2 people always monitoring the situation and then reporting back out to the public.
That's great. And the only thing I would add to that is we're also in a different planning regime now, where the specter of the OMB is not sitting over every application as it's in front of us. So it is, as of a week ago, it is a lot more difficult now for an applicant or for a neighbor or for anybody to challenge a council planning approval if that council planning approval is consistent with their official plan. So that test just became a lot more difficult. And I think there's kind of 2 ways that influenced things in the past. One was an actual appeal to the OMB, and having the OMB essentially overturn the council decision and impose its own solution, or just the mere threat of that happening kind of forced, in many times, a compromise that maybe was not an appropriate compromise, but it was better than what you might have gotten if you'd gone to the board. So not having that kind of shadow hanging over the planning process, I think gives a lot more weight to the policy regime. It makes this plan in many ways more important than the previous plan, because the power of this plan is significantly greater than the previous plan, and it also puts a lot of responsibility and authority on council, because their decisions are going to be much harder to challenge.
That's great, thank you. That's all the questions that I feel. I think I'm going to, I'm in danger of over-intensifying my mic time if I keep going. So I think we're going to take a short break. Please, 10 minutes. I'm seeing, okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. It gives you time to grab a drink, meal, think about some questions that weren't asked, and then when we reconvene afterwards, we're going to open up to the floor, and hopefully we'll get some more questions and some more discussion. All right, thank you.